Welcome to another session in the OOIDA Business Education Series. OOIDA is proud to offer the most comprehensive business education series available for America's professional truck drivers. Before we get started with this program, I'd like to take a minute to thank the OOIDA Foundation for taking educating the American truck driver as seriously as we do. With their help, we've been able to make all the programming on the OOIDA Business Education Series free to all drivers. My name's Tom Gann, and I'm the host for this education series. And today I'm joined by Tom Weekly. Tom is the Director of Operations of the OOIDA Foundations. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that we've touched on several times. There's recently been some regulations passed that have changed the way brokers operate. And of course, here at OOIDA, we were really happy about the changes that were required. But now we're getting all kinds of calls about brokerage services. So we're going to spend the day talking about this new rule and kind of clear up some things. When MAPS 21 came out in 2012, there were some changes to the brokerage bond system. What happened was they changed the bond limits from $10,000 to $75,000. And of course, the brokers were all up in arms, and the drivers, I don't think a lot of them actually understood what was going on. The main purpose of this was to make it harder to become a broker. There were a lot of people out there that would start a brokerage firm and, for $10,000, so what? They would just close shop and open under another name, what we used to call chameleon bond services. That kind of put a stop to that, and everybody was happy about it, but I think there was some unintended consequences.
Tom, you're absolutely correct. One of the things that OOIDA and actually one of the leading broker associations called TIA, Transportation Intermediaries Association, actually worked with us, which is kind of unusual, but did work with us to increase the bonding. And the reason for that was, just as you say, there were a lot of people getting into brokerage that really didn't have a good credit, were not people that you would want to put your trust in, that were doing a lot of brokering. And it seemingly at first it did at least cut down, and has cut down on the number of claims that are out there and the number of brokers are having their bonds, having claims on them. However, that law of unintentional consequences is kind of rearing its head a little bit, because a lot of guys, it seemed, that use brokers for getting their loads and putting their trust in brokers, as pretty much have to do if you're going to use that service, aren't doing their due diligence, basically. They're not looking at that broker to see if they are a good broker. The idea was, well, if they got $75,000, they must be in better financial shape than somebody who just has $10,000.
A lot of drivers out there felt like they didn't need to file as quickly because there was a bigger pot of money.
Correct. And we're finding that out too. And they are more likely to put off some of the things that they need to do in order to file a claim in the correct amount of time, in a timely fashion. And that's essential, as we'll talk about a little later, that's essential in filing on any kind of a bond or trust or whatever may be out there. It's just again, we didn't anticipate that. That's kind of there are those things called law of unintentional consequences. You just didn't foresee that necessarily, but it certainly could rear its head.
So that's what this program today is about. We're going to talk about how drivers should do their due diligence. And it's something that's very important, and you need to do that right off the bat.
Absolutely. The due diligence is the best preventive method that you can use. And it's certainly, if you're not doing that, you have very little recourse in getting a valid claim made and getting any kind of money from a bond. If you haven't checked them out beforehand, and you've already got a bond that's about to expire or has been revoked, and you haven't looked to see if that's a valid surety bond any longer, or trust out there.
Or there's a lot of stuff already filed against it.
Absolutely. And that would be difficult to tell, but there is a place to go, and it is on the FMCSA website.
And that the second part of our program today, we're going to be talking about filing correctly in a timely manner.
And that's true also. You don't just file. There are procedures that you must follow, and it's very important that you follow the correct procedure. So even if you are timely in your filing, if you file immediately after your whatever period of time it was that you and the broker set up to be paid, that next day you need to get on there and file on that bond or that trust. If you don't do it properly, they don't have to pay you. They'll put you at the end of the line in the payment because, well, you lacked a certain amount of documentation.
And that's the third part that we're going to talk about. What happens after you file?
Right.
A lot of drivers out there don't know and understand. Now, the economy seems to be getting a little bit better. We've got a lot of guys moving from lease carriers into running under their own authority. So we've got some people out there who are doing this for the first time. We also have some young drivers getting into the business. And so I think this is a timely program. We need to cover this.
There are some issues still with brokers that we are concerned about, and we'll get into that in the program too. Even if you do your due diligence and a number of, everything that you can, there's still a time lag in there we'll talk about that is a problem that we'd like to see resolved through congressional action, if nothing else, to protect guys. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. And just briefly, we'll mention that if you're leased on to a carrier, one of the things you need to understand is that carrier has to pay you for delivering a load. If they have accepted a load through a broker, they can't tell you that we're not going to pay you until we get paid by that broker. You had no relationship to that broker. That should have been that carrier's responsibility to do their due diligence. And we hear this still. Well, I'll pay you as soon as we get paid. That's not the law. The law says you have to get paid.
For a driver, there's a big difference between a lease agreement and a broker agreement.
There is.
And today we're talking about the broker agreement, not the lease agreement.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's two primary ways that an owner-operator deals with a broker. One is dealing directly with the broker, and of course the other one is dealing through a load board. Let's start out by talking about the owner-operator dealing directly with the broker. If I'm going to be taking a load from a broker, I need to be checking this broker out. How do I go about doing that?
And you're absolutely right. You need to check them out. This is the first part of your due diligence. If you don't check out that broker, then you really don't have a lot to whine about, quite honestly. It's that because the information is available to you to check out whether that bond or trust is still in effect, still valid. Then you go to the FMCSA website and you go to licensing and insurance.
Okay, now I know FMCSA has made a lot of changes to their website lately, and they're always making changes. And we're getting a lot of calls where guys are having trouble finding this part of the website. So let me kind of walk you through how to get there. The easiest way to do it is just go to Google and do a search for FMCSA licensing and insurance. And of course, Google's going to give you a lot of hits. And the one that you're looking for is going to say licensing and insurance carrier search. It's usually going to be the top hit on Google, but that's the one you're looking for. The web address for that site, it's on the top of your screen right now. But if you'll select that, licensing and insurance carrier search, it will take you to the portion of the FMCSA website where you can look up brokers.
Once you get on that page, then you need to know the broker's MC number and DOT number, one or the other, and you enter that, and then you'll get a profile of that particular broker. Within that profile is another little tab, which is Report. You click on Report, and up will pop who their surety bond or their trust is with, how much they have for a surety bond or trust, and it'll actually have on that page the name of the person at that trust or surety bond company that handles that particular broker's business, how to contact them, both phone number and usually anymore an internet connection that you can make with that person. To me, you need to run a copy of that, so you'll always have it on hand just in case something happens. But it will tell you whether that bond or that trust is in effect and how much it's for. If it says revoked, then you don't want to do anything with that person.
That means that brokers legally can't even be operating.
That's true. And they may be operating, but they can't be doing it legally. So, that's your very first thing you do. That takes you 2 minutes to check that out.
If there's been any claims filed against that, will this report tell you about that?
That report will not. To go just a little step further, you may want to contact that particular surety bond person, that particular person named on there as the one who handles that transaction, and you can check with them. They may or may not tell you how many claims are out there on that bond, but they can usually tell you whether it's still in effect. And it kind of depends on the relationship in the surety bond company or trust company with that particular broker.
All right, Tom, on this website, does it tell you how long this brokerage firm has been in effect?
It will. It'll tell you when the bond was put into effect, and that should give you a little bit of clue. If it's been in effect for a long period of time, that's usually a good sign.
If it's only been in effect for a week or so, a month?
I'd be hesitant. Maybe I'd ask for different credit references from that broker, if nothing else.
Okay, here's another question that I get a lot of. If I'm an owner-operator, I've been running for a long time, I've probably got some brokers I've been working with, and I know these people. We've had a good relationship. I don't need to do due diligence with these people, do I?
Yes, you do. It can happen at any time. And unfortunately, kind of like drivers and small carriers or even large carriers sometimes, all of a sudden the first information we get is they're out of business. And this happened several times we've been reading about, especially larger carriers. Just suddenly you think they're been around forever. You've seen them, you've drove for them, you've been driving for them, and the next thing you know, you get a letter saying you need to bring your truck in. We're out of business. And yeah, you may have their load that you're delivering, and you don't know if you're going to get paid or not. So it's not. You're in a business relationship, and in a business relationship, you always want to check to see that everything's still as it was when you first started. I hope you have a good broker and you're getting great loads and getting paid, but that could change at any moment.
Okay, that's when you're dealing with the broker directly. But quite frankly, a lot of guys are dealing with brokers through a load board. And just because you're going through a load board, does that mean that load board checks out the broker? What's the deal there?
The load board may check out the broker. A lot of good ones do. And they have a lot more information available to you. Oftentimes they'll have how often that broker pays, any claims that they know about that are still against that broker.
And is that stuff listed right on the load board?
It is not most of the time. That probably is most of the time. It's an added benefit that you will have to pay for. Personally, I think that's a great idea to do so, especially on load boards. If you haven't dealt with that broker before in any way, shape, or form, then it's a good idea. It's not that much most of the time to check on it. You can figure out how often these guys get paid, if there's any claims, any bad references. You can even get that off of many of the good load boards out there, and most of them anymore actually will do that for you. Especially, and which I'll just bring this out briefly, especially for those who haul exempt products. If you haul raw agricultural products, for instance, those things are exempt from a lot of the federal regulations when they're hauling and the rules and regulations concerning that. And so those brokers don't have to follow all the regulations that others will. So, and those, if you're doing any kind of hauling like that, you really need to check the loads board people with them. Like Red Book, for instance, will have all kinds of lists of brokers, how much they owe, how often they pay, all those kinds of things. And that's even more important to do it then, because unfortunately we still got lots of complaints about brokers who are getting you to haul exempt products. And again, that's a very wide range of products, but you have very little recourse then if that broker basically doesn't pay you.
Okay, now as part of that due diligence, it's important that when you talk to that broker, you get everything in writing. You need to get that rate confirmation sheet before you pick up the freight.
And you have to agree with one another. You make it, and it isn't just a verbal agreement. You make sure when you get that rate confirmation sheet and you fax it back and forth to each other that everything is on that rate confirmation sheet. Not just the freight that you're hauling, but if you charge for detention fee, if you charge for
tie down fees.
any kind of accessorial charges that you have on there, truck ordered, not used, all those kinds of things have to be in writing, have to be on the rate confirmation sheet, has to be signed off by the broker and you. And you make sure all of that is done, and you have a copy of the broker's DOT, a copy of the insurance that he has, the bondings, copy of the bonding, who it's with, and so forth. If they're not willing to share that information with you or give it to you, don't take the load. That's part of that due diligence too. After you've already checked the broker out, you still want to make sure you do all those kinds of things, and you have the right documentation. Because if you don't, when you do or have to file on a bond, you don't have the proper documentation for a valid claim.
Hey, that's a great lead-in for filing on the bond. If you got any problems or any suspicions about that broker, you just shouldn't take the load. But sometimes you haul a load and things don't go well. You end up having to file. Now, you mentioned earlier how important it is to file correctly. There's two things that have to be done. You got to file correctly and you got to file in a timely fashion. So let's talk about what procedures do you have to do to file.
Okay, and a lot of times, unfortunately, most owner-operators and drivers in general out there are nice guys, and they are trusting individuals, even though they've been burned a few times. Most of them want to do the right thing. So that guy says you talk to the broker and you haven't been paid. You agreed, you got paid in 30 days. Day 31 comes along and you still haven't received your payment. File on that bond or trust immediately. Do not hesitate. I don't care how good your relationship is. Don't care if you had a good business relationship in the past. I don't care if it's your best friend. You still need to file timely fashion right then. Don't wait till day 32. Even if he tells you, well, the check's in the mail, the check's probably not in the mail. And you can always say, whoops, sorry. And you can call that bonding company and cancel your claim. File immediately.
Okay, now you made that message loud and clear. The day you're supposed to get paid, if you don't get paid, you file. I got it. But what do I need to do to file? That's not as simple as you might think.
No, it isn't. For that bonding company to look at that claim, they will then contact the broker to make sure that claim that you're filing is good. That broker may say, oh, wait a minute, we've got some damage to the property according to the shipper that has to be resolved before we pay. That bonding company will not accept that it's even a valid claim. There's also paperwork that goes along with that valid claim. You must do proper paperwork or they may not even consider it as a valid claim. So looking at what paperwork you need a bill of lading that's signed that you delivered that product or your freight when you said you would, and in good condition. And there's no claims on that bill of lading for overage, shortage, or damage, because that's your proof that you delivered the freight on time and without any claims against it. But when you file, you need to get a notarized statement signed by someone in your company that's an authorized representative, which clearly can be yourself, and you are requesting payment from the surety, bond, or trust, providing the following information: your company's name, address, and phone number, the broker's name and DOT number, because that bonding company probably has a lot of brokers on its schedule, date the broker engaged you for transportation services, date of transportation service provided, and again, that bill of lading verifies that, description of service, which means where you picked it up, where you delivered it, what the cargo was, the amount owed to you by the broker, and that should be in your rate confirmation sheet that you're going to send along. All of these are copies that you send to them, and certificates that the information provided is true, you completed your obligations under the agreement, and the deadline by which the broker agreed to pay under the contract has expired.
So basically, there are two documents that you've got to have. One is that signed bill of lading and the other is that rate confirmation sheet.
Those are critical.
As long as there's no claims noted on the bill of lading, and of course that rate confirmation sheet has to have everything you agreed in writing.
Absolutely. Those are the critical things you need when you're filing a claim on a bond.
And another thing is, a lot of people they don't catch this. It's got to be notarized copies of all these things. You can't send it by email. You can't scan it in and send it to the bonding company. It's got to be notarized.
Now, there's no rule on that. There's no specification on that. We're telling you what you need to do, because we've seen where certain bonding companies or trusts will say, oh, well, you need to have this notarized, or you need to have this certificate. These are things we hear. So these are things we're saying. If you have all this in place, there should be no doubt that you have a valid claim. Because if you don't, if you're missing something, they may not tell you, but you may be months away from getting any compensation.
Even if they do tell you, they send you a letter and say, you forgot to send the rate confirmation sheet. Well, that's a couple more weeks that other people are filing on this bond, and you're going to the end of the line.
That's absolutely true, and that's the thing you keep in mind. It's reason told you to be timely, because if they didn't pay you, you can pretty much guarantee they haven't paid a number of other people either.
And if you don't do it correctly, it's going to delay the process even further.
Absolutely.
Okay, Tom, I've done my due diligence to start with. I checked everybody out the best I could. We had a problem. I had to file against his bond. I've done everything right. I did it timely. Now what happens? Am I going to get a check in a couple of days?
Probably not. Again, because you're probably not the only one filing on that bond, for one thing. And they're going to check all of the claims coming in. The first thing they're supposed to do, and they do it, a bonding company will notify the FMCSA that they have claims against that particular bond that have not been paid. It looks like valid claims. So when that then drops their bond below $75,000, they basically notify the FMCSA. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Association then notifies that broker that they're in violation of the rules and regulations, and they're below the $75,000. In which case then they give them, unfortunately, 30 days before they act on that. Those 30 days is so that broker can make good on the $75,000 bond and get the bonding amount above $75,000 before they actually act upon it.
So does he have to quit assigning freight during that 30-day period?
Unfortunately, no. That's the biggest concern we have.
So he's still operating.
He still can operate for those 30 days legally even, and that's something we have a lot of problems with, and we'd like to see change. That's one of our big concerns, is that what we'd like to see done is, as soon as the FMCSA is notified that there are valid claims that drops that bond below $75,000, that they immediately revoke that authority for that particular broker to operate. That 30 days, that broker can rack up an awful lot of business and default and get a lot more claims made against them. Unfortunately, you've done everything you're supposed to do. Like you said, Tom, they've done their due diligence. They've been careful. They got the rate confirmation sheet. They've sent in everything they're supposed to send in on a timely fashion. And unfortunately, there's a good chance they won't get paid anything. But if they do, it may be a small percentage of what they should have got paid, because they'll take all of those claims. If they are valid, they'll validate them, and they will then pay a certain percentage until the $75,000 is gone.
And once the $75,000 is gone, it's gone.
It's too bad. Yeah, there's nothing you can do about that. And $75,000 sounds like a lot of money, but when you're hauling freight and you may have hundreds or thousands of people that you are brokering for, those claims add up very quickly. And so what we find is about 12 to 15%, I believe we find a lot of times when there has been claims filed, that we file claims here at OOIDA, that actually get their money, about 12% of what's owed to them, 15% of what's owed to them. And that's not going to get you through for the most part.
That won't pay your fuel.
It barely pays that, if at all, right? And so it's not a good situation. And again, when those 30 days can really be a problem because you've done everything. You've done everything you're supposed to do. And it just still doesn't work out for you because there's that it's a loophole. I think FMCSA is honestly trying to be a nice agency and say, hey, we're going to give you 30 days to make good on this.
Okay. Also, there are different kinds of bonds that a broker can get. And does that make a difference on whether or not I'm going to get paid?
Yeah, it really does. Almost everybody that you'll deal with will have surety bonds, and those are issued primarily through insurance companies. And it's referred to kind of like a line of credit, almost like a credit card. A bond. Someone who becomes a broker goes and gets a $75,000 bond, and depending on their credit rating, they can get that for as little as 10% of the actual $75,000. So they actually have money or assets worth $7,500, and that's not a lot of money, but they get a credit card limit maybe of 75,000 or whatever it happens to be. And so, they don't really have that money there, that assets there. So most of the time that's what's done. They'll put 10, 15, 20%, depending on that particular broker's credit rating also.
But for the owner operator, if he files, even though it's a line of credit, there still should be $75,000 paid out. It may be by the insurance company instead of the broker.
There should be, yes. They will do that. And then the insurance company obviously will go after that broker then for the amount that they actually get pay out, because he's agreed to do that. Like any line of credit, you get a loan, you still have to pay it back. So they will do that, but that doesn't help the owner operator who's making a claim out there. So to some extent, you got to look at some of these surety bonds and these surety bond companies and say, how good are they doing their due diligence if they aren't checking these people out? They do a pretty good job of that most of the time, honestly. But those few that get by, or it just could be a bad business cycle for somebody. That happens also for the brokers as well as for carriers. There's also something called a trust. They may have a trust. A trust is a little different in that you actually have the $75,000 or $75,000 worth of assets that you put up that's actually there. That money, quite honestly, is a lot easier to get your money from them if you file timely. And again, it doesn't fall in that 30-day window where, you didn't, they've still got those 30 days from the FMCSA, but they pay out a lot easier because they've got the 75. They don't have any money tied up into it. They're not loaning you any money. They've actually got it on hand. A lot of your larger brokerages and so forth will have trust rather than surety bonds. And they don't care if it looks good to them. There's a valid claim. They pay out. Now, you may be one of those unlucky ones. The time you weren't as timely as you should have been, maybe, and you get nothing because it's gone.
You filed on day 28 of that 30-day period, and all the money's gone.
The problem becomes then, of course, like we said, that 30 days is still a problem where if they're still brokering freight during those 30 days and it's still, when you do your due diligence and you look it up and it says it's still in effect, there's nothing that says, there might be sometimes I'll put pending, and that should be a warning flag. It may not say that, however, and you assume that they're good. And you take that load when they just don't have the money. We'd like to see that eliminated. That they need to, once it goes by below that 75,000, they're in violation and they should be revoked immediately.
So basically, MAPS 21 covered some things about brokerages that we like. It's good for the owner operator. The problem is sometimes the owner operator may get a little lackadaisical and not do the things that they were doing when it was only a $10,000 bond. They think, it's $75,000. I don't need to do all my due diligence. I don't have to file as quickly. And so MAPS 21 was a good thing, but you still have to have self-discipline and do what you're supposed to do. Looks like we've come to that part of the show where I have to be the bearer of bad news. I'm sorry, but it looks like we're completely out of time for this program. I do want to thank Tom for being our guest, and as always, you've given us a lot of information and, of course, a lot of food for thought. And for our listeners, I hope you'll take this information that Tom's presented today and use it to help protect your business. I hope you'll join us for other business education programs on the OOIDA Business Education Series. Simply log on to www.ooidaonlineeducation.com. In the meantime, remember that you're important to us. Please take care of yourself. And don't forget, OOIDA is the only organization that's been fighting for the rights of individual truck drivers since 1973. If you'd like to join us in this fight, just give us a call at 1-800-444-5791.